record. All right. Here we go. Okay. Holy
Okay.
shit.
So,
All right, here.
welcome everybody again to another episode.
Sorry, let me go ahead and stop my video. Maybe that'll help.
Okay, all right.
It says it's recording now. We'll edit all of this out.
Yeah,
Or not.
F it, we'll do it live. Okay. So,
Okay.
all right. Welcome again to another episode of the Name Pending Podcast. I am your host, Ruben Vargas. I am joined by our co-hosts, Stephen Moore and David, who's back this week. Good to see you again, David. We're not, Isaac is not with us this week. He is occupied elsewhere. We just want to let you know, Isaac, that we do miss you. And especially this week, we're going to talk a lot about international issues today. Isn't this going to be fun? But before we begin with all that's going on in the world, I just want to give a shout out that, ladies and gentlemen, we got him. Donald Rumsfeld is dead. That's right, man who practically next to Dick Cheney engineered the Iraq War, died on June at the age of 88. And you know, as much as I would have liked to have seen the other members of the Bush administration be tried in a military tribunal, I think this is as close as we're going to get to die of old age. And I sincerely hope that the Reaper's coming from Henry Kissinger next, because you want to talk about a complete monster. Henry Kissinger is a complete monster.
Right. So
Thoughts, everyone, on the passing of Don? Go ahead.
So something that always comes up when a monster, a dumb piece of shit who's killed a lot of people, ends up passing away is people talk about the problems with dancing on people's graves and celebrating death. And to be quite honest, there's other things we could have been celebrating if people did their jobs right, like his imprisonment or his prosecution in front of the UN as a war criminal. I don't know. I feel like in general, there's lots to be said about how like nobody really truly deserves death, but it doesn't change the fact that the world is better off without certain individuals. And if you're one of those individuals, I'd really rethink your life choices, man. Like this is basically what it comes down to. So dance on a grave, sigh of relief, or feel conflicted, doesn't matter. Like the fact is the world's slightly better without him.
Well said, Steve. Do you have thoughts on this, David?
I'll just be honest and say I'm not. I didn't really even know who he was. I didn't. I guess I'm not as informed on the Iraq War as I should be. So I'd be interested to hear. I guess obviously, we don't like him. We don't like him.
Of course.
I maybe now's a good time to talk about maybe the particular his.
Donald Rumsfeld, if I'm not mistaken, he was the Secretary of Defense, right, Steve?
To be completely honest, I didn't research any details before preparing for this. But I can tell you this much.
Yeah.
I've seen him enough in the political view, full well advocating for unnecessary wars throughout the decades of my life. So
okay,
there's no denying that.
Here we go. Okay, so here we go. He was he ran the Pentagon. So for all intents and purposes, he would have been the Secretary of Defense. Let me just Donald Rumsfeld. Live, everybody.
Right?
But yeah, what sticks out about Rummy as he was called by George W. Bush was that he was, yes, that's I was correct. He was the Secretary of Defense under the George W. Bush administration. It was him and Cheney that engineered and largely planned out the quagmire, the utterly disastrous war in Iraq that was only ended during the Obama administration. We're still in Afghanistan. That is currently as we speak. But we can blame both Rumsfeld, Cheney, and Bush as well for involving us in what's known as the Fur Wars. So
Looks like
far-
he was one of the prime architects of the
Yep.
weapons of mass destruction
Yep.
lie. So
a couple of the things that he said when a reporter asked him about the presence of nuclear weapons in Iraq, whether about the evidence, he said point blank to the interview to the reporter, there are known knowns, things that we know about. There are unknown unknowns, things that we know that we don't know about, and there are known unknowns, things that we know that we don't know about. And it was that, and of course, this other one that he said was the absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence.
which of course is like a philosophical
Yeah. So this is what really burns me
conundrum.
is this is my territory. This is
we don't have
philosophy. Like, what really gets
Yeah.
me, I mean,
we don't have proof that Bigfoot doesn't exist, but that doesn't prove that he doesn't exist.
anyone who understood what he's
Yeah.
saying there would have no real response other than, so what? What the fuck do you know, motherfucker? Like, tell us what you know, act on what you know. Don't act on what you think you might not know. Like, that's not an excuse to go to war. I think I might not know this, but
Right.
yeah, that's a good reason. Let's preemptive attack the Middle East. He's a
Yeah.
doofus.
Well, and he's also, again, the architect of the war in Iraq. I mean, I can't think of anybody else who has more blood on their hands to, of course, Cheney W. and of course Henry Kissinger. I mean, really recommend y'all check out the Vietnam War documentary by Ken Burns. And during the latter end of the Vietnam War, it was Kissinger as Nixon's Secretary of State. He engineered a lot of the brutality that happened towards the end of the Vietnam War. But in any case, as far as I have to say on Rumsfeld, he's off to the great unknown unknown. Rest in piss. Okay. So I think a good start off on some actual topics here. I wanted to talk at length about the recent assassination of the Prime Minister of Haiti, because this one caught me completely. I think most people, when they saw this on the news, they were completely blindsided at the news, actually. So, earlier this month, the Prime Minister of Haiti was assassinated in the presidential palace, and
in front of his wife, right?
yeah. Well, I believe that the former first lady is still in Florida being treated for his wounds as we speak. Prime. So yes, it was at 1 a.m. when the attack happened at the. Okay, so it was the president of Haiti. I apologize, and this was Prime Minister Laurent Lamont, First Lady Martine Moise, and the two of them were were attacked by a military, not a military outfit, a mercenary outfit. They stormed the presidential palace. They identified themselves as DEA agents. In fact, um, locals recorded the incident, and one of the members of the mercenary group shouted they were from the DEA. And so far, the mercenaries have been arrested. There is an interim prime minister currently trying to hold the fort, but there's quite a few details in this story that kind of make my head turn. For one thing, one of the members of the mercenary group that carried out the assassination was an informant for the Drug Enforcement Administration. So when the mercenary group identified themselves as DEA, that was on behalf of that one member who was an informant. For another thing, it seems that this outfit was hired by a doctor out of, and you can't make this stuff out, but they were hired by a doctor out of Miami, and that this mercenary group is an outfit out of Colombia, which would explain why they spoke they from what was reported on the scene, that these mercenaries spoke both English and Spanish. They were recruited from Colombia. They were likely trained by the military, because a lot of what's been going on in Colombia, the longest civil war in world history, have we have a base out there in Colombia, so that doesn't surprise me at all. But it just seems bizarre, and really just super bizarre. And knowing a little bit about the history of Haiti just seems, I don't want to say regime change, because I haven't heard anything about the country of or the president of Haiti being a problem, but it just all seems suspicious. So,
Yeah, what's interesting is I believe the president had chosen a successor at the time of the assassination, and now it appears that um, this assassination has thrown into flux the question of succession. So very bizarre. Apparently, when they said they were the president's security stood down when the attack started happening. So there's a lot of questions, a lot of questions.
yeah, who was involved? And I guess I got it wrong. It is a prime minister, Laurent Le, and I'm having a hard time pronouncing his last name. Lamont, Lamoth, actually. That's the name of the prime minister, the assassinated prime minister. And from what I was able to, he actually was set to step down from his role as prime minister, but he was dragging his feet and insisted,
Hmm.
essentially trying to pull a Trump, surprisingly, saying that, calling the election rigged, and throwing all kinds of nonsense out there. And there has been strife in that country, continued protests and acts of civil disobedience in that country, because the former prime minister wouldn't step down. It just, to me, I mean, knowing our knowing our country's history when it comes to Haiti, it just seems a little suspicious. Like, I don't want to say it's the CIA, but it sounds really suspicious to me.
Well,
What are your thoughts on?
It's confirmed that some of the people who carried out the assassination were, I believe, CIA informants
Well,
previously.
informants, what?
DEA informants. So
yeah,
So
that's
we're talking,
confirmed. It doesn't necessarily mean the DEA was formally involved, but obviously people are going to have a
yeah,
suspicious eye to that.
Mhm.
informants tend to be
and
criminals, just to clarify, for for a bit of charity to the DEA. Um, something that I do want to comment on this that I took issue with is the emphasis on the quote unquote English accent of the person in the speaker. Um, when I watched this, when I learned about this story from Crystal and Sager, I remember they were saying, "Ooh, this is bizarre. There was an English accent," and I listened to it. I re-listened to it. Go ahead and check for yourself. But I hear that recording, and I think that's a French accent trying to sound like it's like an English accent,
The
and he's
footage to
flipping.
me is very poor quality, and so when I heard the footage, to me it's undiscernible. It's such
Hmm.
poor quality. I'm not saying maybe you're right, Steve, but it's such a poor quality video. It's barely even understanding.
Well, it's just the audio that I'm talking about. The
Hmm.
audio that was recorded, it was clear enough, and long enough, I think, in terms of what was said to at least
Do you
catch
think it was
where
a French accent?
it was clearly an accent, like not an American accent,
Mhm.
uh uh nor any kind of English accent. This is somebody who's who has English as a
European.
second language. Well, I mean,
Hmm.
because in Haiti, Haitian is French, or at least French based, from what I recall.
Oh.
And what you hear is what I recall. Like, this is like from a few days ago when I heard it. So it's like, for me, it was like, this is the DEA, and I forget like the rest of it. But then, like, they were struggling, and they were doing pretty good in that first line to sound like they were American, but then they trail off, and it's it becomes very obvious with the way they pronounce it. In fact, I don't know if you guys wanted to try sharing a screen and maybe playing the audio. I only know that it was on Crystal and Sager, but
Yeah, I can't. I don't know. But in any case, I think enough people have heard have heard have heard the audio, and or at the very least enough of the captured footage by locals in Haiti to get a sense of who was on the ground and what they sounded like. Um Again though, like, what kind of seems like, I think we're going to want to bring into context is, of course, um how Haiti has long been this sort of pariah within the Western world. They stood as the single poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, and they started as a slave colony, a French slave colony, until the locals successfully rebelled and threw their masters out. In fact, the Haitian rebellion is, I think, one of the few, if not the only, successful mass slave revolt at to this day. So in the years in the centuries since, this all happened back in the 1800s, but in the centuries since, Haiti has been exploited. They've been when anything. I remember vividly when there was that huge earthquake might have been back in 2004 in the mid aughts, and we barely raised a finger for Haitian relief, and it was trending on Twitter for a while.
yep.
Um, Everybody's everybody, the current president Joe Biden spoke, and it was only a clip, but he said, and I'm paraphrasing here, Haiti could sink into the ocean or it could rise 300 feet into the sky, and it would make little difference. So that should tell you everything about how America, not so much the country as a whole, but how our government views Haiti, basically.
Yeah. Also, I remember around that time hearing some interesting stories about Haiti being a great in great need of humanitarian relief, but that the individuals who got permission to give humanitarian relief funding actually were just like these fake nonprofits that would take all the money and run, or give it to themselves again through contractors, and like barely a cent, if any, would be actually given to the Haitian people.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Okay, I have it. I'm actually on Wikipedia as we speak. It was January 12th, 2010, when Haiti was struck by that magnitude 7.0 earthquake. And my goodness,
I
between
thought there was one earlier that you were from 2004. I thought there was one earlier.
there was a hurricane
Okay.
in 2004 that really did a number. But it says here on Wikipedia, there was a massive 7.0 earthquake. About 300,000 people died, and up to 1.5 million were left homeless. And there was also a massive cholera break. And I want to apologize. I keep on getting the it was President. Let's see. Gonna try to get his name right again. President Moisi, who was assassinated. Apparently, Haiti has both a president and a prime minister.
Mm.
Who would have known? But this whole thing is kind of really this whole thing is really bewildering to me. Like Haiti doesn't stand out like as far as we'll get into Cuba eventually, but Haiti wasn't that big of a target, or at the very least not on our government's mind as much as say Cuba or Venezuela was. So
Do you
it,
feel inclined to believe that this was some sort of U.S. Obviously, we're speculating here. There's nothing confirmed, but
mhm,
are you inclined to believe that that's the case? To me, I don't even know if I'm inclined. I mean, obviously, I'm suspicious of our whatever we do
mhm.
in Haiti. I definitely don't put it past us, but I'm just not sure if perhaps it could have been something internal. Um, I don't
That's
know. I
true.
don't know. That's what's
So I
Now,
just have to. So, sorry, just when it comes to the conspiracy theory mindset, I have to emphasize a few points here just to be clear. Um, there's like it's wrong one to ever say that somebody's claim is definitely false just because it's a theory or a hypothesis about a conspiracy. Conspiracies do happen. But that being said, like there's no better process for figuring out where the bad actors are and what the conspiracies are than to first lead with charity and then find that when you've granted all the charity you can, you still can't fit all of these pieces together. So you know someone's lying and you know where to investigate next. That being said, unless we have clear evidence that starts to really give us a lead that it was the US, and falls in line, say, with past experiences beyond just like, yeah, the US fucks with third world countries and takes advantage of them
right.
and doesn't tell us about it. Yes, they've been proven to do that time and time again. And we're very fucked in that regard. We don't know what they're doing. They still have power in the CIA to do that sort of thing. But the question really remains, in this particular incident, do we have a smoking gun? Do we have real evidence to go with? Unless we have that, we should withhold our assumption that the CIA was involved, that the DEA was involved. But that's not to also say that we shouldn't be suspicious and wanting to keep an eye out for leads and evidence as they might pop up.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Agreed.
my take on this is, um, the so this is more an indictment against America as an empire and the hegemony that comes with it. Basically, we are set to leave Afghanistan in about a couple months, and I wouldn't be surprised if the Biden administration is considering opening up a new front in what can be called Central and South America and the Caribbean, given given how given how what's going on in Haiti, and I know that Venezuela certainly hasn't gone away. I'm pretty sure that the boys in Langley have something cooking up, but I'm inclined to believe that we're going to see more incidents like this happening in both the Caribbean and in South America as we withdraw from the Middle East, basically, because the military industrial complex needs a new target. Now, I could be wrong. I could be entirely wrong about this. But there's also the fact that the CIA has done the Central Intelligence Agency has done some really insidious stuff across the world. I mean, they've engineered
It's hard to keep
countless.
track. It's to the point where it's hard
Exactly.
to even like. It's like you read the history about it, and it's like this is crazy.
Exactly. I mean,
And then it's
I mean,
omitted from our history books, which makes it all the harder to like uh, follow
yeah. I
along.
mean, countless coups in countries like Guatemala, Bolivia,
Nicaragua.
Nicaragua. Yeah, yeah. And of course,
I mean, it'd probably be a shorter list of places in South America where we haven't done
yeah, and I'm
coups.
pretty sure that, of course, and I'm pretty sure that the CIA does have influence in what I'm calling the Caribbean, which is Haiti and the Dominican Republic, and that area of the of what can be called the Western Hemisphere. So, as far as I'm concerned, it's hard not to suspect that the CIA has involvement when they've actively been the boogeyman across the world in instances like this. So I'm going to remain open to the fact that could have entirely have been just a let me put this could entirely have been the engineering of this one really rich guy in Miami decided to hire a mercenary team to take out the president of Haiti for his own political gain for whatever reason. But at the same time, it's like things are going to shake out. And if it turns out that the CIA was involved in some certain thing, I won't be surprised at all. So we're just going to have to watch out and see what happens. Now, moving on, there's unrest in another country, and that's in Cuba. Over the past week, there has been an explosion of civil unrest, of protests within the long the long beleaguered island nation. Want to remind everybody that we still have a blockade against Cuba to this day. And I've been listening to there's this podcast series called Blowback um, by Brendan James and Noah Colwyn, and their second season is on the Cuban Revolution, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and how it leads up to today with the current blockade. And to me, like what I've taken all in is that this has been a long time coming. What's going on in Cuba? We've, as a country, we've done everything that we could to sow unrest in that country by starving them of trade, of access to necessary items like tech and food and all kinds of stuff that could be easily traded from with other countries. And in the immediate sense, Obama under the Obama administration, we were going to loosen um, we were going to improve relations with Cuba. Maybe not so much as far as lift the embargo, but at the very least open up relations in some way. And Obama, just like the Iran agreement and the Paris Accord, didn't get that into legislation. So when Trump came in, he completely threw that out the window with executive order, and he just tightened the blockade that much tighter. And what came about recently with the pandemic, and you have a situation to where Cuba does have a vaccine. We spoke about this on our last episode that they've developed a 3-dose vaccine, but they don't have enough hypodermic needles to distribute the vaccine. And it must be said that the needles are surgical steel, that you need high quality steel, because the last thing you want is the needles to break or bend when they go into your arm to inject the vaccine. And from where I stand, I see it as that I really do think that there are people who are legitimately frustrated and angry in the immediacy, and they are going to, take it out on their local government. That's natural. Basically, you're going to have people who, if shit happens, they're going to take it out on their local, on their local government. That's what happens. um how that being said, though, there are massive protests going on in Miami. There's this huge social media campaign called SOS Cuba, and that, to me, that has CIA written all over it. Quite frankly.
I feel like this is. I feel like you can have an attitude of wanting to help Cuba without wanting to do what obviously Republicans are, probably a lot of Democrats are salivating to do, which is to just establish a military presence,
Hmm.
or something of that sort. I think that this really relates to a lot of the nuances of how difficult it is, I guess, to have a leftist position on foreign policy, because as a leftist, we're inclined to want to help, um, but also if we understand how the U.S. military works, we know that often us trying to help is a guise to just um, make things worse. I relate it back to the Israel Palestine issue, and that you saw a lot of people at the time saying to block military aid to Israel in response to their treatment of Palestinians, whereas here you're seeing an opposite, saying because of not because of the conflict, but because of what's happening, we need to lift the embargo, in essence, to do the opposite and provide the necessary aid. Um, and I think, and ultimately, I'm in favor of doing that. But I think it really points to the nuances of these geopolitical situations, and how difficult, I guess, it can be to have, I guess, a strong opinion, because on the one hand it's like we know what we want to do, but what we can trust the US government to do is much different.
Yeah, I think with the history of Cuba, there's definitely a lot to be concerned about in regards to propaganda and influences that the CIA may have going on there, because they certainly have had their sights set on it in the past, and they have yet to really fully explain themselves to this day as to why ever. Like, it kind of makes sense in a Cold War argument, but I mean, you'd think by now, if it was really a danger, we'd learn that Cuba has nuclear missiles, or it would be a big conversation in the news media to go alongside this sort of propaganda of, ooh, they're communist and so bad, and we've had this long standoff with them through embargoes forever because they're communist. Meanwhile, we're improving our relations with China, and
Hmm.
at least when Trump's not in office. There's clearly more under the surface. Like, there's a lot to just say. I don't know what's actually going on here, but what I do suspect, and I think, given our government stupidity, um, there's credence to this sort of way of looking at things. Is if you guys have ever seen the movie Cube, there's a there's a concept that comes in that suggests that, like, you have, so in the movie Cube, it's a horror where you have these people thrown into this building with a lot of rooms, and some of the rooms have traps in them, and one
Hmm.
guy reveals one thought process of where this cube could have come from and why they were thrown in, is that somehow it might have started as some kind of idea that made sense to someone, and then it got passed along the way to from one person to the next, not always really understanding what it is they were getting into, but they would just continue to build it because it was there, it was in the plans, somebody had made the business plan and moved it forward, and everybody played their part. Then when you get to this point where you throw people in it, you ask, well, why would you throw people in it? And you go, well, if you didn't throw people in it, then you'd have to admit that there's no point to it.
Hmm.
There is no point to it. And that's the point.
Right.
And so I think that's very like I always imagine what's really going on under the surface is a headless conspiracy, a headless organization of complete and utter doofuses trying to get their piece of some kind of pie or their kind of status that they're looking for, but they're really out of touch morons when it comes down to it. None of
Mhm.
them actually wants to fix anything. None of them actually wants to troubleshoot anything. They're just a bunch of sociopaths exchanging blows on some massive scale that somehow has to involve the rest of us.
And to that point, Steve, to give a little bit of more context, or at the very least my view on it, um, I remember back during the Bush years that the new axis of evil was Iraq, Venezuela, and North Korea. But Cuba was also talked in those tones as well early on, during the lead up to the invasion of Iraq. Like, Bush did still the Bush administration still considered Cuba an enemy of the state, and I what I'm getting to is that even after the fall of the Soviet Union, even after the fall of what was the largest communist communist entity in the world, there was Cuba right in our backyard. There was Castro right in our backyard, still standing. And I actually have done a lot of, digging into the history of our involvement within Cuba, and we've tried to assassinate Castro in so many ridiculous ways. Um, tried to poison him, tried to poison his milkshake, tried to give him an exploding cigar, tried to give him a wetsuit that was infected with tuberculosis. Like, I really do think at this point it's a matter of that this island nation that continues as a communist government, a communist entity, and unlike, say, North Korea, what you can say about Cuba is that the people of Cuba, it, I would argue that they don't live under a brutal dictatorship. Like, it's rough living in Cuba, sure, but they have quite possibly, like, this is a country that had nothing but created a vaccine for lung cancer, that created a vaccine for COVID, and had sent out doctors in some of the hardest hit areas when the coronavirus first broke out worldwide. Like, I really do think at this point it's that the island nation of Cuba and its people have stood in open rebellion and open dissent against U.S. hegemony, and that's what drove certain people up in DC mad, basically. Kind of like, you know, to put in another context, we're the bully, and Cuba is supposed to be the one kid that's we're supposed to pick on and to get one over, but they're still standing, and that's only driving us more mad, basically.
Yeah, well,
Mm.
to be sure, a lot of it is it's all behind a huge wall for us, right? We don't get enough media coverage of what it's actually like in Cuba. Um, I
That's
can
true.
say the one documentary that I watched, I felt like I got a clear view of something happening in Cuba, was a little Christian retreat that was a place where parents could send their kids to get corporal punishment legally. If you live in the United States and you wanted your kid to be treated like shit and bullied by somebody else completely, yeah, you could send them to this
Hmm.
little organization that resides in Cuba. So like we clearly have some kinds of exchanges going on with them, one way or another, to make that happen. But
To that point, Steve, I think it might be in Guantanamo Bay. We have that military base where we disappear people and torture them, and it is in Cuba. So I wouldn't be surprised if those discipline camps to send unruly teens are in that area, basically.
yeah, it could be similar policies that allow it, or who knows what. But it's just a strict church organization. It's not a prison even. They organize it like
Gotcha.
a prison, right? But it's not like
Mm.
bars or anything, or people that'll shoot you if you run. But there are police in the Cuban police that will return children if they run away from that little camp. And so
Okay.
So the and the reporter didn't mention anything. So it's like the reporter, the journalist who did the documentary, she didn't mention anything in regards to Guantanamo Bay having some similarity. So I wouldn't want to jump to any conclusion there, other than that she might have caught it if there was something significant like that. Because her whole point was to expose it.
Right.
And now, so that's not to say I can fully know what Cuba's all about or not. It's not the same as knowing that in Saudi Arabia, our ally likes to chop off heads in the streets because people spoke trash about their religion, or they're suspected of being an apostate, right? So my thinking is, it sounds to me, if I'm only going by this, the subtle airwaves that I get from Cuba, that it's a hit or miss with a lot of people. There's no clear oppression of some lower class there, but there are people that come to the US, complain, and weirdly enough, they just sound like American propaganda every time they do. Like, they don't sound like they're genuine.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, there's people that are like,
Yeah,
we're having a good time over here. We've got prosperity. We're gonna make it. We're gonna keep moving forward. And the closest thing to any kind of threat that Cuba seems to stand for is that, well, once upon a time they thought as communists they would ally with Russia and consider launching a nuke at us. But I don't even see Russia, like, I barely see Russia and China being on the same page, since they're not really communist, they're not really socialist, they're dictatorial pieces of shit that are full of narcissists leading the place, just like the US, who all want power. None of them have a philosophy. None of them have some kind of real system of trying to help the poor and help the meek that Marx had envisioned. So I don't know. I find it's just all of that trash talk propaganda makes me more and more suspicious of the people who spew it, not knowing what the fuck they're talking about.
And that's a good instinct to have. I would also really recommend, if y'all have HBO now. Anthony Bourdain, the late Anthony Bourdain, and his show Parts Unknown, which was a really good series, one of my favorite, one of the best TV series is out there. He actually went to Cuba back in the mid 2010s when we were starting to open up relations with them, and it was a look at a certainly an impoverished nation, but as materially impoverished as they were, like, nobody was really going hungry, nobody was homeless, and they were seemed to have been providing for themselves in the best situation that they had under this unreasonable blockade and embargo. And I think that any sane person would say at this point, would recognize that Cuba is no threat to us and would want the blockade to end, basically. I think at this point, like, and again, to your point, Steve, about, Cubans who come to America and talk all kinds of stuff about living in Cuba, but sounding weirdly like Americans. I've been following a lot of the discourse on Twitter, and from what I've been reading up on Cuban history, you have this contingent of Cubans who their families once owned whole plantations or were incredibly wealthy before Castro showed up and led his revolution and took away all of that from the very rich, basically, and redistributed back to the people. So I think it's this sort of longstanding grudge that if communism never came to Cuba, my family would still have this enormous wealth. So I think it's that sort of grudge, and that grudge manifests into anti-communism, into one of the biggest, one of the largest and most regular voting blocks for the Republican Party to this day, actually. So it's just, it's a mess. It's certainly a mess, and there's a lot to pick at. But I think I think that in a lot of the simplest solution to it, though, to reiterate, is that the blockade should be lifted, and we should stay out of whatever the people of Cuba decide to do. Because if we interfere in Cuba, if there's so much as a regime change that happens in Cuba, it's going to end up. We're going to see what's going to happen in Cuba is going to end is what happened in countries like El Salvador and Libya. It's going to be a mass slaughter like we haven't seen in a long time. So, you know, I just hope that I really do hope for the best, but I expect the worst at this point.
Yeah, it's one other contradiction that I just want to point out as well is when we're hearing from the ones who like to spew the anti-Cuba propaganda, tending to be Republican. I just want to point out, like I respect that those who are watching who are conservative and who are Republican, you're human beings and you're not always the dumbest rock in the bunch. But the fact is
Hmm.
that you are contradicting yourself if you hold both the belief that Cuba is a horrible dictatorship, communist cesspool, and when people try to come over the border and seek refuge in the U.S., you say no, fuck them, they're foreigners. We want foreigners out. What the fuck do you want them to do? How about you just ask yourself that? If you're in their shoes, what the fuck would you want them to do? And if you want to tell me, well, I don't give a fuck, it's their problem, well, then that's why I say fuck you, because you're a piece of shit dehumanizing other human beings because it's too much for your stupid little head to handle.
Well said, Steve. Final thoughts, David, on the whole Cuba thing?
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna say, like, I think what is most frustrating about conversations about the strengths and weaknesses of governments, particularly socialist or communist governments, is that people's ideology just gets projected and colors the whole thing. So that if you acknowledge any strength of a socialist government, you're just running cover for, like, you're accused of just running cover for, like, socialism or whatever. Whereas if you point out a weakness of a socialist government, then you're just doing like a right wing talking point. And it gets really difficult to really assess the strengths and weaknesses of these governments, which I think ultimately is something we should be ideally doing because that, in the human quest to find the best type of government, the best type of economy, it would be really nice if we could not just like throw up our ideology into the conversation and color the whole thing, especially as in places like Cuba where we don't get enough information, so it can be hard enough to get a clear idea of what's going on. So
And
mhm.
that's true. What you both brought up, Steve and David, and is that um, we don't know a whole lot about what's going on because our the mainstream media has a vested interest in portraying Cuba to
Right.
be.
It seems like everyone has an agenda on how Cuba is portrayed, so as to fulfill some agenda or make some point, um,
Yep. And
and it's a
it,
disservice to everyone,
it,
especially the people who are suffering in Cuba right now and who are protesting their government, um, and trying to
and,
have their demands heard.
and I want to reiterate that it's perfectly logical that a people that a country's people in desperate times like we're experiencing right now, you have this massive pandemic, and on top of it a blockade that's starving them. Like, of course people are going to be are going to go up in arms and are going to express their distaste at the local government. Of course that's going to happen,
Right.
and I have no quarrel against the actual Cubans on the ground who are protesting the local government. They have that right. They have that prerogative. But if I hear that people outside of America are having opinions, particularly to say, we ought to go in there and do something about it, it's like the last thing we want to do is involve ourselves in these situations like this, especially if we're doing everything in our power to make it worse. So, you know, the best thing that we can hope for is that the embargo is lifted. Although with the way things that are going, what I brought up at the top, that I do legitimately suspect that the Biden administration is looking to open up a new front in Central and South America and in the Caribbean. We might see things escalate, and we may see an attempt at regime change in Cuba. So,
It is interesting because, like you mentioned, Obama loosened these restrictions, Trump tightened them. My understanding is Biden ran on loosening them again, but is not doing that so far. Um, why is a big question.
as far as I'm concerned, like Biden is Ronald Reagan in all but name. If you look at his the kind of things that he ran on, the kind of things that he accomplished when he was a senator, and the abhorrent legislation that he pushed for, that if you look back on, you recognize as the end point is now with the police state and all this kind of terribleness that we find ourselves right now. I really do. I I wouldn't be surprised if Biden actively wants to regime change Cuba, basically.
What makes me hopeful is I really don't believe there's any political appetite. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm naive. Maybe
Okay.
I'll eat these words, but I do not think there's any political appetite right now for a foreign war adventure, misadventure by the military with everything going on, especially as we're just pulling out of Afghanistan and we're already hearing the fear mongering and rhetoric, and maybe that's an oversimplification because we're seeing,
But
the
politics never
Taliban
motivated us to
activity.
go to war. It was the money behind the scenes that and taking our tax
Right,
dollars.
but I think the public sentiment is so hungover from the involvement in Afghanistan and similar wars that I think a new war would be terrible politics. Um,
Was a
maybe I'm wrong.
I'll
Maybe I'm
grant you. I'll grant you. The thing is, if we started more war in some other territory that Americans just barely even know existed, then um then that in and of itself, like basically where I'm coming from, that in and of itself, that's how they keep it hidden. They don't talk about it, and
mhm.
it's like
That's probably the
the
most.
American people look
That's
the other
probably
way.
where That's probably
But
the biggest threat is something more covert and sort of off the radar. That's
right,
definitely probably more of a bigger
but
threat.
to your point, what I'm thinking is Cuba is definitely right here in our backyard, as it were, and we are
Mhm.
not going to miss the boat when when we are going all out war, when there is a regime change and we have a real hand in it. Um, that's the other thing is like the CIA hasn't been able to fully cover up a lot of its other operations with Cuba. Why would the DEA suddenly be able to so negligently operate and then still cover up so well if they have necessarily any involvement? It's kind of like one of those
I
things I
think I
expect
think
that we would see a lot of evidence, a lot of smoking guns to turn to if we were
I
in.
think if we did have involvement, we will know soon. I think I'm not so confident because to me a little more time I think needs to pass before I would feel confident that there would need to be more evidence to indicate. But I do mostly agree with that point. I don't think it's something that will be covered. It just because it just doesn't seem like they've done a good job of covering other covert operations. So
Yeah, and even if we don't have the main cable news media on our side to actually report these facts, we still have other trustable sources that will cover it if it is found out. And I always turn to like Kyle Kalinske to make sure I have somebody that's going to tell me this shit, even if he is a few days late. Usually,
yeah,
And that's the peril of American-based media, even on the YouTube, is that our scope isn't. We don't have a whole lot of scope what's going on in the ground in other countries. And I also would like to point out that there are videos posted constantly of both protests and counter protests in Cuba as we speak. It's just that Cuba doesn't have the best mobile uh, online network. So anytime somebody tries to capture a whole lot of video, it just slows everything slows everything way down. Saw a lot of people in the streets, carrying pictures of Castro and saying "Viva Cuba, Viva Castro," and Viva Miguel, not Miguel Diaz Canel, the current president. So I'm inclined to side with the people of Cuba in this matter. And I will reiterate, end the blockade and, stay out of the people, stay out of their business, stay out of Cuba's business. Let them live. When it comes down to it, let them live. And I might not be a communist, but as a socialist, I do find common cause with the communist with the communist people of Cuba. I do find common cause in with them and solidarity with the people of Cuba, and hopefully things turn out all right. But hope for the best, expect the worst, as far as I'm concerned. Okay, next on the turning from international news. So, do we want to cover the Texas Democrats fleeing or the Nina Turner election? What are we feeling like, folks?
Texas Democrats fleeing. I'm not sure I am familiar with that one.
Okay. I don't know, David. How much do you know about the Nina Turner election going on right now?
Yeah, I've been following it pretty closely. So Nina Turner is running in a special election for Ohio's 11th congressional district. The seat was vacated by Marcia Fudge, who was appointed to Joe Biden's cabinet as Secretary of HUD. Nina Turner started off with a huge lead in polling, um, like like way like blowing everyone out of the water. Hillary Clinton and Jim Clyburn have stepped in to endorse one of her opponents, however, Chantel Brown. And so the polls have tightened because I think it's been condensed now to basically Nina Turner versus Chantel Brown. Um, and then there's a super PAC that started sending out mailers, basically just lying about Nina Turner's policy positions. Um, so it's kind of gotten ugly, basically. The election's on August 3rd. And so obviously I'm pulling for Nina Turner. I've been volunteering and donating.
Oh,
But also, I think it's really sad to see um, I mean, it's super petty, I think, of Hillary Clinton to step into that race and to make an endorsement. I think it's pretty, I guess, vindictive. But then just yeah, the mailers going out with the line saying claiming that she's against minimum wage increases and against universal health care, just an outright lie. And it's really it's frustrating. It's also disappointing because it's really disappointing that we can't just because I'm not someone who wants to sit here and demonize Chantel Brown or say terrible things about her. I'm ideologically not aligned with her. I'm significantly to the left of her, and I just think it's really sad that we can't just sit down and be like, what are the differences between the two candidates, and who do the voters prefer? Instead, we're doing lies and smears, and it's really dirty, and it's sad. But I still do think Nina Turner could pull it out.
it doesn't surprise me at all that the establishment, through people like Hillary Clinton and Jim Clyburn, are involving themselves to the level that they are. I mean,
They're scared. They are
yes,
scared.
but more to that, like, I remember, I was a victory captain with the Bernie Sanders campaign, and Nina was one of the. I don't think she was the campaign manager, but the main one. But she was on the board, and she was she was one of the strongest organizers of that group too. And for her to pivot to become and she's becoming a congressperson or a
Yeah,
senator.
for Congress. Yeah.
Okay, all right. For her to pivot that way, that's that only sounds like a natural progression. And I have to be honest though, like, I don't want to sound cynical, but when I look at Nina Turner, like, I understand why, like, David, I understand why you might want to support her. Like, she has, she has, there's a lot of goodwill towards her, basically, among us who volunteered or involved ourselves with the Bernie campaign. At the same time, though, the same could have been said with Alexandria Ocasio Cortez, and to see how far that she's fallen from pushing for Medicare for all to taking it off on her campaign website, from visiting the 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 immigration camps and pictures of her breaking down and crying, to now saying, well, those kids in cages, that was all under Trump. That was all Trump's fault, and trying to accuse away the Biden administration, to now, calling on inserting herself in the ongoing strife in Cuba and calling for the current president to step down. It's like, I'm not saying that Nina, I just have a hard time. I have a strong suspicion that should Nina, you know, ascend to that to become a congresswoman, that she would have her own fall as well. Basically,
I think that,
I'm
yeah,
burnt.
this is the other part of the conversation that I think is interesting, which is, yeah, I don't think that that's not a valid concern, and I think um, it's it, basically my thoughts are it's got to be a both and approach in terms of we have to be active in electoral politics as well as the fact that no question if she is elected to Congress, you know, there will most likely be shifts and like we've seen with AOC and one of the interesting points that a lot of people have been bringing up lately is how apparently Nancy Pelosi was a very outspoken advocate for universal health care early in her career. So it's very clear that just electing the right people is not going to solve the issue. There has to be an outside push and pressures.
Mhm.
So I definitely agree with that. I think my attitude about it around these conversations and conversations I've been seeing lately is I'm really not a fan of depoliticization, which is I think where a lot of that sort of sentiment often leads to or concludes in, whether purposely or not. So that's my concerns around some of those, I guess, some of that rhetoric, I guess. But at the same time, we do need to acknowledge the validity of and the reality of it. To me, the question is always how can we look at things soberly but still get people involved and politicize people, not depoliticize them.
Oh, I see. So, well, for a moment there, I wasn't sure what you meant by depoliticization. But basically, yeah, you're talking about
I
the
think like when you
shit slinging for a campaign rather than speaking to your own merits.
how do you mean by that?
Well, like it's a common issue with our voting system, right? Like because we're first past the post, we get into this drain where it's an easier argument to make that the other person's worse by pointing out all their flaws rather than say, I'm the candidate for you because of all my virtues.
I think the reality is the question is who do we want to be protesting? Um, who do we want to be trying to pressure to do the right thing? And how close to that edge are they already? And so Nina Turner, who I have to admit, she's just a really talented speaker, and there's a very emotional aspect to it that I have to admit I'm guilty of. But that being said, I mean, I just do think it would be objectively better to have a Nina Turner as opposed to her opponent. But if I do think if all you do is elect that person and then you don't, show up to the protest or show up to the organizing, yeah, that's not going to turn out well either. That seems to be clear with people like AOC as well as Nancy Pelosi and Barack Obama. We see like these people run on these great ideas and these populist sentiments or progressive sentiments, and then they just get deflated when they're in the halls of Congress or in the White House. But to me, it's like I just to me the answer can't be to withdraw from the electoral process. I guess that's where I guess where I'm confused about some of the conversation about it. And maybe you could answer. Is the answer to pull away from the electoral process, or
No,
to try
no.
to?
So first I want to say, like, my sentiments, the first thought that comes to mind is hearing that Hillary Clinton chose a side. I hope it fucking backfires. It should backfire because she is a piece of shit.
And
Not
it
a piece
already
of
did
shit.
somewhat because she had a huge.
Yeah.
She had a huge fundraising haul after that endorsement. So, yeah.
So
But
the
sorry, go on.
like Hillary Clinton's a lying piece of shit. Not for all the lies that were smeared about her by Fox News, but by being an outright piece of shit who always pretends to be for something, but she doesn't do much more than be the problem who's going to save the world from her own mistakes later down the road at best. So she's a careerist. She's never really done anything good for the country. I challenge you to show me evidence to the contrary of that. Where's her virtues? And there's a long history of her just being utterly stupid and on the wrong side of history, along with Joe Biden. And that being said, with Nina Turner, look, Nina Turner is a new-ish face for a lot of us. She is saying the most leftist, liberal, progressive views and sticking to her guns. She is fighting as the one sole person who stands out, even amidst all of this bullshit, with even AOC and the squad turning against the actual values that we voted them in for. That still, however, if you listen to her speeches, if you actually pay attention to what she's doing when she gives a speech, and you ask yourself, how sincere is she? Well, I can say this much: she prepares for her speeches, and she uses a style that is essentially a preacher in a gospel church. That is what her influences are in how she gives a presentation and a speech of her values. Now, that's very powerful. That's emotional. And once again, the first thing that I recommend everyone do is lead with charity. Like, if you're coming into this and you don't already know the history that I know of Hillary Clinton, by all means, lead with both the charity that maybe I'm right, or maybe Hillary Clinton's a great person that you've just never heard any bad things about, and you'll go look for yourself, right? Lead with charity on all sides, and then wait until people get caught up in their lies and their spin. And when you do start to uncover some things, you'll start to figure out who is the piece of shit that's lying here, who is the person who really stands for progressive values that are going to help you. And Nina Turner might turn out to be just like the rest of them, but at this point in history, she's on the right side of history. She's been consistent about being on the right side of history, and she's playing the role well. There are some strategies that I would recommend her that could improve her overall candidacy, in my view, but she could disagree with me, and I'd still think, okay, the thought that comes to my mind is, if you are a liar, you are the best actor on the stage right now. Hillary Clinton can't act to save her life, but at least Nina Turner, even AOC, a lot of individuals that we've been pushing for, they can fit the position, they can fit the role well enough to follow through with it being a real headache to them after all of that effort and work, to have to fall back, to have to go and say, I changed my mind and I'm not going to let the people know why or how. I'm just going to pretend like none of that ever happened. If you see they're working hard at fitting the role that you need, the values that you need, if they are convincing, that's a lot of energy that they put into that, and you have a much better chance of expecting or seeing good things come out of them than you do from somebody who is a poor actor, who can't for the life of them even say the lie that they would need to say that would be convincing, but that they just on the face of it are too obvious to see past their tell and know that they're bullshitting you. So if this is what I'm just saying is, if we have no choice but to elect people who are on some level pieces of shit and liars or just not good enough, then pick the one who's the best actor, because the one who's the best actor will at least do something right before they fuck everything else up.
Yeah, I think I largely agree with that sentiment. I think, um, I mean, I think
Sorry,
like I saw a tweet recently that said, I'm sorry.
what's one more thing? It's not to say that I
Oh yeah.
necessarily think people should jump in and pick from who's the lesser evil when that's what seems to be on the table. If you have a lesser evil condition, you're looking at two really shitty actors because they haven't convinced you that they're not pieces of shit. So if you have that circumstance for you, um, I I I know people are going to label this as apathy, but it's not. Don't stay home and not vote. If your thought is it's not worth it and you shouldn't vote because you can't bring yourself to vote for a piece of shit, then what I do in those circumstances is I go to the polls, I vote on the details that I can vote on, that I feel comfortable voting on, and everything else I write in abstain, because there should already be an abstain option there. And if you show enough people writing in abstain, you're showing that you had a willingness and ability to be there at the polls ready to vote, but they didn't give you an option that you could get behind. They can't label you crazy. They can't label you apathetic because you went there. You showed your position is fuck both these guys. So anyway,
I think that the sort of existential conflict of it all is really the question of, is it just this innate part of the human psyche to sort of become corrupted when you are tempted by the shiny thing, which seems to be to a large extent what we're seeing with AOC and the squad, which is that I think it's like, I believe that AOC went in with the right intentions, but that it was like, you start giving a little and giving a little and giving a little, and before you know it, you've become the thing that you went there to oppose. And I don't really necessarily know the answer to it. I think I have questions in my mind about, is there really like any hope of like true authentic and righteous leadership and powerful positions, or is power just too corrupting?
I
Because it just
I would
I do want to go ahead, Steve.
okay. I just I would like to say I definitely, with the case of AOC, I've got lots and lots of criticism for her, but in terms of her motives, what it comes down to is like the reasons why she decided to go back on her positions and bullshit us. Like I still, for me, the greatest sin is being caught in a lie and not fucking owning it and owning your shit. So she's done that to us of late multiple times, and it's clear. But as per her motive, I can't say necessarily if she still has the right intentions and just thought lying was okay, or if she had the right intentions and then was corrupted by the power that she had, or if she never had the right intentions and just was like a really brilliant actor
there's
before getting into power.
there's a Kool-Aid in Washington that is like, of course we want to do all that nice stuff, but like first we have to play the game, we have to play the long game, we have to do this, we have to do that. And I think there's something to like playing long games and strategies and whatnot, but it just seems very clear that it's like it becomes this facade of like, we're playing the long game, but the long game is like what, 1,000 years? Like
Right.
when,
No,
when are you gonna do the thing?
that's a great point.
But I think psychologically, these people convince themselves. People like AOC, I think they convince themselves. I think it's just so easy. It's just so tantalizing. This thing, this power
No,
that she has now.
that's a great point. No, that's the thing is, assuming she went in and had her like with the best of intentions, but then or maybe even is still lying and still has the best intentions. I think that's probably the best charitable thing to consider for her. what would convince her to do that? I could see maybe
She's
she's got a gun.
surrounded by
Let me
people. I
finish.
think she could. Yeah. Sorry.
She could have a gun to her head. She could also
Yeah.
suddenly have when seeing everything around her looking classy and good instead of seeing a ghetto around her. She got used to the environment and started believing in some American dream
Lunches, a car,
again, and then
property.
decided, okay, I'm gonna just hold on to this and I'm gonna believe that everybody else can rise to this like I can, like I did. And maybe her views and values changed a little along the way where she forgot where she came from. um the
I would like to bring up I was muted earlier, but I would like to bring up a point to David about this whole conflict about involving us in politics. There is this larger discussion about the value of electoral politics, especially with leftists and what leftists and progressives hope uh, to achieve, and that's pulling the Overton window leftward
Right.
and providing much needed reform, and also things like a Green New Deal, Medicare for all, free state college, and student debt relief. That this has to be a massive effort, that we can't just rely on voting for a politician and hoping they'll do the right thing up on Capitol Hill. No, we have to do our part by by putting pressure down here through mass movements and all that kind of stuff. I think that at this point, especially in light of the Bernie campaign completely collapsing, and the fall of AOC and a few members of what the media created as the squad, I think you have a lot of people who are disillusioned and who are looking at other people like Nina Turner and being a little bit wary about this kind of stuff, like myself included. At the same time, I want to admit that, she does seem like she's a real one. If anybody involved in that campaign was a real one, it was her. And I'm just concerned that what's going to happen once she does become, if she becomes, if she wins and becomes a congresswoman, how how much will she, how much influence will Capitol Hill have over her, and that remains to be seen. But for now, like, I certainly hope that she does succeed, and if anything, we do have to bring up how the establishment is scared of her, legitimately scared of her right now. And I think that's a good enough reason to continue supporting her.
Yeah,
Especially,
they wouldn't be pouring this much in if they didn't at least think that
unless
her.
that was the whole dance that they had in mind from the beginning, there's that possibility. But if it's not,
Sure.
then we can then that gives all the credit in the world to Nina Turner as being genuine and being someone we can get behind. This is the thing. It should be a naturally selective process for each of us. When somebody is proving themselves, has finally proven themselves beyond all charity you could grant them to be a lying piece
Mhm.
of shit, you throw them the fuck out of your life. You say you're too toxic for leadership, you're too toxic for me, and you go looking for the next one in line. As long as you keep throwing them all to the wayside and always hold a grudge, always hold a fucking grudge, unless they can own their shit, don't let them get away with anything. And that being said, you'll find the politicians who are actually worth getting behind when you can show that they have the guts to speak against all of the bad actors that you've proven are there.
I would also like to add to this discussion, which has been really productive. It remains to be seen what will happen. And you know, I certainly hope that Nina Turner, that she does succeed. However, we do want to give her the benefit of the doubt, and hopefully, she not only does she succeed, but hopefully that she stays true, and that's, I think, what we can all hope for in light of what's been going on around us. And I hope I'm not coming off like I'm pushing anybody, but like I think we're kind of running low on time here, so I kind of wanted to hit on one last story, and that would be the ongoing, ladies and gentlemen, we have ourselves a recall election here in California. It is official. The election will be in September. And I did, in the discussion before today's recording, I did state that as far as I'm concerned, that this is Gavin Newsom's election to lose. So for those of you listening or watching who might be out of state, a recall effort, it's a two-step effort. There's one, on the ballot, there's two questions. One, do you want to recall the governor? And two, who do you want to replace him with? Now, I remember back in the early aughts when we recalled Governor Gray Davis and replaced him with the Governator, with Arnold Schwarzenegger. That was a wild time. I was about like maybe 11 or 12, but I remember vividly how this huge Arnold Schwarzenegger was at his peak of popularity. And this dude, he still has charisma, but he was at his absolute peak. And it has to be said, that's how he was able to successfully win the election and become the governor of California, because the Republican Party here in the state is greatly diminished. And if you know your California history, you can go back into the early 90s and see that before the 90s, California was what could be considered a purple state, but then afterwards with rising immigration, immigrant communities, and also consciousness amongst immigrant communities to vote and to advocate themselves, that's what tipped it into becoming blue. So in my mind, I think that Governor Newsom doesn't really have any serious opponents right now. I mean, there is what's her face, Caitlyn Jenner. However, she just seems like, you want to talk about the crabs in a bucket. She is the biggest crab in the bucket. Like, I remember she was on Sean Hannity's show, and she was like, "Oh, my neighbor was closing his hangar and moving out to Texas," and I'm like, "You have a hangar? You're flying planes? You know, go fuck yourself." You know what I mean? How can you talk about owning a hangar and planes? And not only that, but when she spoke more on her platform, she stated that she wanted to establish a board to investigate whether children who wanted to transition were mentally fit to transition, basically. And is some this is some draconian shit, basically. And that's why I call her the biggest crab in the bucket. But even then, like, I see Caitlyn Jenner's influence as not being nearly as big as what Schwarzenegger had back in the day to succeed, because recalling a governor, the ballot is a two-step process, and I don't see Jenner having the name recognition or the influence to pull something like this off. What are your guys' thoughts on who could challenge Newsom, and what does this portend if he's going to succeed or not?
I would say, I think just off the cuff, Caitlyn Jenner has a better chance, or sorry, Milo Yiannopoulos has a better chance at being governor than Caitlyn Jenner. Like, it's the same kind of complicated mess of where she's a piece of shit to all parties. On the bigoted party, they don't like her for being trans. The rest of us who pay attention don't like her because she murdered somebody and got away with it, because she is full of shit. And the best charity you can give her is that she's a doofus, like that she doesn't understand half the shit she says. That's just utterly wrong. And then the people that love her are just still like what still remains of fans of the Kardashians. Like, this, the thing about Caitlyn Jenner is I still say lead with charity, grant charity up front with people before moving forward. But in Caitlyn Jenner's situation, it still stands as a relevant point to at least from my standpoint to say this is someone who, if the only reason turned like if in truth the only reason Caitlyn Jenner transitioned was to remain relevant in the public eye, I would not be surprised. That's not me accusing her of that, but pointing out she's such a disgusting piece of shit human being that it wouldn't surprise me.
David, your thoughts?
My thoughts are the recall process in California is really stupid, and it seems like this is just like in the playbook, I guess, for Republicans to like try to install Republican leadership where they can't get elected. Because the recall process, as Steve pointed out, Milo Yiannopoulos has as good a chance as Caitlyn Jenner because the recall process is you say, should news be recalled? Yes or no, and if so, with whom? And whoever has the highest percentage of a litany, like it could be 100 candidates, they could finish with 9% of the vote and become governor of, the ninth largest economy in the world. I think that process needs to be reformed. It's like, in my opinion, I don't think it's democratic. I think it's intentionally sort of, I don't know if I would say deceptive, or it's meant to be like, how can we get a Republican in charge where a Republican could never get elected? And this is the process that Republicans are using. That being said, I most likely will vote against the recall. I'll most likely vote against recall. I haven't seen any candidates that seem interesting. If there were some sort of leftist candidate, I would be open to listening. I haven't seen it, so.
And to bring a little bit more context back in that, and I might have to look up the exact year of the Gray Davis recall. Like there were a crazy amount of people who stepped forward and wanted to and threw their hat in the ring. Gary Coleman. I think there might have been a an adult performer as well. Just a whole bunch of crazy random celebrities decided to throw their head in the ring, and I do think at that point, like, and to bring a little bit of more context into this, like I live down here in Chino, and south of the 71 is Chino Hills, and that's a more affluent part of the Chino, what's called the Chino Valley. There's a lot of it's a more affluent neighborhood. There's a lot of more entitled and self-important people down there who when I drive down there into that area, I see people waving signs to recall Gavin Newsom, and just a bunch of privileged people who feel that why should these stores be closed down? Why can't I go into my favorite restaurants and bars and hairstylists and barbers? I mean, I thought this was America. So to me, like when Gray Davis was recalled, this was over, if I remember right, this was over vehicle registration fees. Like there was a legitimate reason to get that guy out, basically. This is just one big tantrum over the state lockdown. To my biggest contention was the governor didn't put checks in the mail, but other than that, it's like the lockdown was the right thing to do. He just didn't follow through with it. But in any case, like I don't think that this was a serious effort, because we would have seen a serious candidate, um, pull themselves, and we would have seen a serious candidate develop by now and put out major make major ground. But I think it's a little too. The recall election is going to be in September. That's in about a month and a half away. I really do think it's a little too late for any one candidate to legitimately challenge Gavin Newsom at this point.
I mean, I wouldn't say that much, because I mean, unless you're talking like all the mail-in ballots have already made it. That's just the nature of the US is we do change our views on a dime if
That's
we
true.
can get the word out. The thing though that interests me here is like who might be a celebrity worth throwing into the ring. Like as far as like with Gavin Newsom, I don't really care if you want to argue that he did okay, as opposed to like he clearly wasn't the best leader, but he did okay somehow through COVID. And you want to give him that credit. I hold grudges, and
Mhm.
Gavin Newsom vetoed ranked choice voting in California. So I'm going to look for any excuse to throw his career down the toilet at any chance I get. That being said, I mean, what kind of celebrity would have a chance who we could trust? I mean, Susan Sarandon is like all that comes to mind so far.
Yeah, and yeah, it says something to where, here in California, the only real way that you could, surmount being a Democrat is being a celebrity, and overcome the Democratic machines to be a celebrity, like Schwarzenegger was. And I'm looking at it; that recall was in 2003. That was almost 20 years ago. I feel old, everybody. So, yeah, I to those who are listening, especially if you are in California, I would encourage everyone to vote not to recall uh, Governor Gavin Newsom. I mean, I have serious grievances against Newsom, but at the same time, it's like I I seriously believe that if a Republican governor assumes, if a Republican assumes the governorship, we're going to turn into Texas or Florida, and it's just going to be a major shit show. Things are going to get uh, indescribably worse here in California. I mean, I
So,
think Republicans have been itching at the bit to do here what they've done in Texas and Florida. So,
so if I may, I just want to reiterate my position on that overall thing of if Republicans, it's like Gavin Newsom's the same. Like it's not, he doesn't have values, he doesn't have a philosophy
that's
that
true.
attaches him to being a Democrat. He's just another piece of shit like the rest of them. And so yeah, you can say you're afraid of Republicans taking over California. I highly doubt it. But even
Right.
if that was the case, it changes nothing if we're talking about careerist politicians. They're all the same. They stand for no one's value but their pocketbooks.
Hmm. That's true. I certainly would have hoped that we would have gotten somebody to Gavin Newsom's left to challenge him, but that doesn't seem very likely. So that's the situation as it stands with the ongoing election, the upcoming recall election. And before we end, I would like to point out that I don't know if y'all been keeping tabs on this, but um, oh my God, Matthew McConaughey is heavily rumored to running for the governor of Texas, and he hasn't said anything officially, but he's made his presence known on social media and on the late night shows. And the current governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, is set to run again in. I think there's going to be another gubernatorial election for governor in Texas this in 2022. So
You know,
all I can.
that's just epic. Matthew McConaughey running for governor. When he finally announces, Matthew McConaughey, tell us, are you going to run for governor? All right, all right, all right.
Y'all just got to keep on living. Livin. At this point, though, I mean, to the good people of Texas, like, should you bring about Governor Matthew McConaughey, I just want to say y'all have nothing on us.
I mean, Beto O'Rourke came super close,
Yeah,
so
but
it's not out of the realm of possibility. I think it's intentionally a celebrity because they're really trying to get over the hump in Texas.
yeah,
Um, I'm from Texas, so I'd love to see Texas turn blue.
Honestly, I'm surprised it's taken this long for actors, celebrities to take over politics, because you have such really horrible actors that have been established careerists and they don't get voted out. But yeah, if you go in and you're a celebrity that everybody knows, you've got an edge, and all you have to do is look pretty doing it, like running for that office. you'll take anybody who no one is still, like, after years of recognizing their name on a ballot, they still don't know jack shit about them, but they might know
Mhm.
about you because of that role you played.
I think
Even a villain.
I think most celebrities are too egotistical because they realize someone who holds public office is most likely is going to be ultimately disliked by the majority of the population by the end of their term. I think that scares celebrities more than anything.
And
Really?
you
Just
said
from
something.
like my thoughts on like the psyche of an actor and like
Mm.
I
being
I
needy.
find that I find that interesting. Like,
Mhm.
because I mean, I know they see all the likes and dislikes and all the
And I think most actors they know they're out of their depth on politics because most of
uh
them, again, most of them, not all of them, but most of them are. Like
Mhm.
you talk to the average actor on politics, and I mean,
but isn't it their job to really, like I've seen actors make some really bad mistakes before, and more than half the time I blame the writer because the writer clearly didn't do enough research, but they're always out of their depth when they're playing
I
a role.
often wish actors felt more of a sense of civic responsibility to research and know, but I don't know if it would ultimately be for the best or not if they tried to speak out more on political issues.
I,
Um,
I want to make a point that I think that, with Trump's, first and hopefully only term as president, I think that opened up the Pandora's box to where other, celebrities have realized that, I really don't need any political experience at all. Like,
but
Reagan.
also, like, he's one of the most hated people in American history now.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
So I agree. We'll definitely see now that sort of shadow, you know, egotistical sort of temptation. But I think
mhm.
I think it is very likely to be often, yeah, people trying to resurrect their careers, if nothing else. I definitely know someone who's thriving is definitely not going to want to.
So, David, I think
Hmm.
I'm gonna want I'm gonna want you to have the last word on this issue. As somebody from Texas, how likely do you think it is that McConaughey would run? And if he would run, would he win?
I don't know how likely he is to run because I'm not really super familiar with him or where his head's at. But I definitely think he can win because, like I said, Beto O'Rourke came really close. I think
Hmm.
so. I think there's no reason it's not conceivable that he could pull it off. And I think it's a smart political strategy to run a celebrity that's beloved by, and he's a very specific celebrity, right? Who has that Southern appeal. Uh, so it's smart politically. I don't necessarily love this idea of celebrities in politics. I think it leads a very dangerous road to go
Right.
down. But that being said, I would vote for him over Greg Abbott.
Yeah. Greg
That-
Abbott
That's the
has,
governor of Texas, right?
yeah, current governor of Texas, who,
I would vote for McConaughey over him at the end of
oh yeah, Greg Abbott is a monster right now, and no, he's a terrible governor, and who knows? All I can say to the good people of Texas is, if the opportunity comes, do it. All right.
Get rid of
I
Abbott.
think that I think that should do it for now. Thanks everybody for listening. I want to thank my co-hosts David and Steve being on here. Hopefully, we'll be able to get Isaac and the rest of us here and have a full court on here. But until then, thanks everybody. Keep hydrated, keep cool, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, guys.
Thank
Bye.
you guys. Have a good one.